Lindsey is about to go down in a way that I think he's going to regret his whole life.
What do you say to him?
I say, Lindsey, I'm just embarrassed by what you're doing.
Well, that was Joe Biden last night on CNN, responding to news that his former friend and Republican Senator Lindsey Graham intends to scrutinize his son Hunter for his work with the Ukrainian gas company Burisma. Graham, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee and a close ally of the president's, has already asked the State Department for documents related to the Bidens and Ukraine. And throughout this past week that we heard from Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee push to have Hunter Biden testify as part of the impeachment inquiry. For more on this and the 2020 race, I'm joined by Bo Erickson and Sean Sullivan. Bo is a CBS News campaign reporter, and Sean's a CBSN political contributor and national politics reporter who joins us back again from the Washington Post. So, Bo, I want to start with you. Is this constant attention on Hunter Biden and the vice president having an impact on his campaign there?
Well, good morning here from Iowa. It's still a little loud as Joe Biden is still taking actual selfies with candidates here after his speech, after the Vilsack's endorsement. But funny you asked that, because I was talking to a voter here before, and she said that when she was at the doctor's office earlier this week, the impeachment hearings were on the television in the waiting room, and there was about 15 or 20 people in the waiting room, and one gentleman walked in and he said, "This is BS." And so that started a whole conversation of whether or not President Trump is innocent of what he was doing, but whether Joe Biden and his family did anything inappropriate in Ukraine. And this struck me as kind of different than what we've heard the past couple of weeks, because a lot of people at Joe Biden rallies, obviously, they say that he did nothing wrong, that this is spin from President Trump, but it is still being talked and, I guess more importantly, debated here on the ground if the Bidens did anything wrong.
You know, Sean, momentum is so important, pressing the flesh, going to these events day after day. If there is a prolonged Senate trial, what do you think that means for those 6 senators running for president who have to be there for weeks and weeks ahead of the first caucuses and the primaries?
Well, you're right, and it adds an extraordinary potential variable into this process that we haven't seen, at least in recent history. If you look at the televised debate this week, you had a bunch of U.S. senators on that stage who might have to make a decision in a few weeks about how much time they're going to spend on the campaign trail, how they're going to get back to the campaign trail, and also potentially fulfill their duties as senators if there is indeed an impeachment trial in the Senate, if the House decides to go ahead and impeach President Trump. So they're going to have to figure out what to do, because you're right, Iowa is a place where voters, caucus goers there, want to see their candidates. They want to talk to them. They want to ask them questions. And we're looking at a moment right now where, these caucuses at the beginning of February are coming up very, very soon. So it does present a dilemma to a lot of these senators. And then also, what does it do for the candidates who are not in the Senate? People like Pete Buttigieg, Joe Biden, and others who don't have to be at these hearings. Does it free them up to potentially spend more time with these caucus goers in Iowa? So we could see some big strategic decisions that these campaigns and these candidates are going to have to make when it comes time, if and when there actually is a trial in the Senate.
Bo, there is some good news. Biden was actually able to pick up an endorsement today from former Iowa Governor Tom Vilsack. This is giving him likely a boost, potentially, in these recent polls. Biden's neck and neck with Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Will this make a difference?
Yes, this endorsement comes 72 days out from the Iowa caucus. And as far as the campaign is concerned, it's coming at the perfect time. As you mentioned, the polls are kind of in a dead heat here in the state. And Biden, for himself, he said that this is the biggest thing that could happen to his campaign before caucus itself. We've heard mixed messages coming from the Biden campaign saying whether or not they will win the Iowa caucus. But Biden himself today said that he believes he will win the Iowa caucus. I was talking to voters before the event today, and one friend of Tom Vilsack, the former governor who endorsed him, he said that, this was kind of expected, the endorsement here. Christy Vilsack said in her speech that she's known Joe Biden for 33 years, so it would have been a shock if they did not endorse him. But another voter said that she thinks the importance of this endorsement is because when Governor Vilsack will give advice to Joe Biden, that he will actually listen. And therefore, she thinks that this, for the campaign realm, is a big pickup for Joe.
It's important to have those kinds of friends. But it's not just Vilsack, Sean. A top African-American councilman in Mayor Buttigieg's hometown of South Bend, Indiana, has actually also decided to endorse Biden. Does that underscore a problem for Buttigieg with trying to court these black voters? How is that shaping the black vote in this race?
Well, when you look at the trajectory of this race, you're seeing a couple of different things happen. One, you're seeing Pete Buttigieg do really, really well in Iowa, which is a predominantly white state. A lot of recent polls show him at the top, if not near the top of the polls. But at the same time, you're seeing him in other states like South Carolina, where the African-American vote is crucial in the primary, do very, very poorly among African-American voters. I think it's very clear right now that in this race, if Buttigieg is going to want to compete in these more diverse states, he's going to have to improve his standing among African-American voters. And African-American voters are crucial in the Democratic primary, and we see that reflected in these candidate strategies. After the debate earlier this week, we saw a lot of candidates try to strengthen their outreach to African-American voters. And right now, for Joe Biden, that is one of his strengths right now. When you look at his support, it's very, very strong in the African-American community. It's very, very strong in the state of South Carolina. So the question for some of Biden's competitors is how they can shake that support and whether they can make a case to African-American voters that they are the candidate that can beat President Trump and they are the candidate that they should support.
But we understand Biden is actually already floating some potential running mate names. Who's he eyeing right now?
So last night in Winterset, Iowa, he was asked by a voter, and after he asked the woman who asked him the question if she wanted to be the running mate, he kind of said, well, the press is going to make a big deal about this. So he kind of laid out some characteristics of what he's looking for. He said a woman would be a good option, maybe a woman of color is a good option, but someone with experience for sure. And then he floated a few names. He said former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. He also kind of did a shot of adrenaline to maybe more of the activist wing of the Democratic Party by naming Sally Yates, the former deputy attorney general that was let go from the Trump administration. And then he also mentioned two senators as well, both from New Hampshire, the second in the nation state for primaries, and that's Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan. So there's just a few names. Well, I'm expecting we'll probably hear a few more he floats before this campaign's over.
All right. And Sean, it's hard to believe there was a debate this week with all this other impeachment coverage. You were actually in Atlanta, and your latest reporting focuses on how moderates are fighting back in a presidential race defined so far by liberal ideas. What efforts really have we seen that might move the primary more towards the middle?
Well, I think we're seeing an increasing concern among party leaders and even some voters that the discussion in this primary, some of the positions that these candidates are taking are too polarizing potentially, and they want this discussion and these candidates to sort of move to a more centrist position. They want them to adopt the sort of strategies that we saw Democrats adopt last year in the midterm elections, where they focused on, these so-called kitchen table issues. And this last debate, we really saw a discussion that seemed a little bit different than we saw in previous debates. And we saw more moderate Democrats assert themselves. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is sort of a more moderate centrist Democrat, got really good reviews coming out of this debate. She warned about the dangers of giving away too much stuff. Senator Cory Booker went after Senator Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax. And so we're starting to see the centrist wing assert themselves more in this race. And we're even hearing from former President Barack Obama in some recent public comments saying and actually sort of urging these candidates to bear in mind what the electoral implications of taking the positions they've taken could be. And he's warned them, look, in his view, that this country is less revolutionary than it is interested in solutions and more practical solutions. So there's also that element going on right now. We'll see how this plays out. I mean, there still is a strong and vocal liberal base right now that is engaged in this primary. You're seeing Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren, two candidates that appeal more to liberals. at the top of the polls right now, still in close competition in a lot of these early states. So this is an ideological battle that's sort of gone back and forth and hasn't really been resolved yet, and probably won't be resolved until we actually get to the voting process early next year.
There's a lot going on underneath the surface with this election. I want to thank you, Sean Sullivan and Bo Erickson. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.